Welcome to PlotLines, where we'll use our over 30 years of experience in real estate communications to uncover the real stories behind real estate. I'm Heather Crowell.
And I'm Britni Acriveau. Dive in with us as we invite guests to break down the ever-changing landscapes of real estate together.
All right, welcome back to PlotLines, everyone. Today we're here with Amanda Warner, founder and principal at 248 Advisors. Amanda, welcome. We're so excited to have you on. Wondering if you can introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your journey in commercial real estate, and tell us a little bit about 248 Advisors and how you serve the industry.
Sure, great, thank you. So my background is in commercial real estate. I started in property management, so really learned the day-to-day, what goes on at offices, and then worked my way up in my career. Also have a lot of retail experience as well. And so an opportunity arose earlier this year with a client I actually had worked for in the past when I was doing third-party management, and they wanted to bring me on to help them with some of the challenges they were having at their shopping center of redeveloping it, re-tenanting it, just making a whole bunch of changes, and we'd work together. And they asked to hire me, and thus began my consulting. It was simply based on an ask by a client. And then the name, it's really just a wink and a nod to where I'm from, which is suburban Detroit, and it's my area, and it's my area code. So that's the name and the genesis of 248 Advisors. It was based on a relationship and left to my hometown.
Love that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Heather and I both have done a lot of work in retail.
Yes.
Heather
many years.
Yeah. Heather comes from a retail background, and then we've done a lot of client work in retail and other leasing too. So we're excited to dive in here with you. So as you know, the whole premise of our podcast is about exploring headlines in the real estate space and breaking them down with our guests. So on the leasing side of things, it actually seems like there's sort of like a positive outlook about how things are rebounding in retail and office leasing. But what's your take and what's your perspective from what you're seeing from where you sit?
So I think what's interesting about all of the news stories is that they go for the buzziest headlines, and that's what gets carried forward. And sometimes you have to ask the question, well, where's the article getting, what is its source? What's the I know that sounds so boring, but what's the source? What's the data? And what part of this is true?
Right.
Yep.
And sift through that. And then once you understand that, you can see, is there really a story here? Is there anything to talk about? Or was this just something to get a headline? And sometimes there are stories to come from it. So, what am I seeing? You can hear stories, but then you can drive around your neighborhood and wonder either why are there vacancies, or why is it taking so long for that store to open?
Oh my gosh,
or,
yes. Yeah.
This type of store would be awesome in this shopping center. Why doesn't the landlord put it in there?
Right.
Why don't you just learn that what you see is that they can be all different, and there's things going on that, as a consumer, we don't recognize. I think another thing too that's very different with the retail space versus some of the other sectors is we all have opinions on it as shoppers. Whereas you might have less of an opinion about what's going on in an office building or in an industrial park. But when you're retail, you're a consumer, you've got a lot to say. So I think that's also why retail can be so buzzy.
I've always said that the headlines are so relatable, especially when a retailer files for bankruptcy. People know who they are, and that's why there's so much coverage. But I think, to your point, there's been a shift, at least on the retail side, where there's been a significant amount of demand from a leasing perspective, and that has sort of been changing over the past few years, which has been nice to see. You also do some work in office leasing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and the trends that you're seeing there, relative even to what you're seeing on the retail side?
Yeah. So office, I have more direct experience these days with the retail side than the office side, but just in terms of what I know or how they relate. I think office is more driven by the company and what their growth strategy is, also what their staffing looks like, and what type of workspace they want. So decision makers are spending a lot of time thinking, Do we want a lot of space or do we want a little space? Do we want hoteling or do we want fixed offices? And just really trying to juggle that. Whereas retail is more end user and consumer driven. And where do we want to be? What type of access do we want to have? And the employees sometimes come secondary, and it's the customers that come first. Right. So I think those are the different trends. I think, well, we all know all real estate is location based, but I think retail, sometimes tenant will choose a space that might not be the newest, flashiest building, but it's geographically where they want to be.
Yeah.
Whereas office, sometimes there's a lot more of a demand, and landlords feel like they need to have the latest amenities or redo a common area or offer certain things to attract tenants.
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess shifting back to retail then, especially since that's your sort of more core area of expertise. Obviously location, right? Tenants are looking for the best location, but what are some of the other things that tenants are prioritizing? And then on the landlord side, how are they, competing to attract the best or next biggest retailer to their center?
Yeah. So I think on the tenant side, most tenants are location driven. They know what area they want to be in, and they're just going to see what spaces are available. If a tenant wants 1,500 square feet and there's a center that they love, but the center doesn't have that size, they have something smaller or something larger versus a place down the road that has their size. So they're really I think the retailers are location driven and size driven.
Sure.
And then secondarily would be what type of work is needed for that space to be what they want. On the landlord side, there's a lot that goes into it that people don't realize. One really big thing is tenant mix. And landlords think strategically about what type of tenant they want in the plaza. So there could be a tenant that wants to be somewhere, but if the landlord doesn't want that type of tenant or already has that type of tenant, that tenant is not, it's not an available space for them. Another thing that goes on behind the scenes a lot of time are parking calculations and parking counts that municipalities require. And again, you don't realize this as a consumer. You just wonder, why is there not a this at where I want to shop?
Right.
Or why is there no parking?
Yeah.
Exactly. So all of those things go into it where a landlord could want to bring someone in, but they can't because of a parking thing or a zoning thing. For example, there's a shopping center I was involved in and a liquor store wanted to come. And there are geographic restrictions between liquor stores and schools and public parks and churches and other houses of worship. And we had to do the distance thing on Google Maps to make sure that the liquor store was far enough away from the park across the street so the liquor store could open. Some municipalities won't allow dollar stores or only allow so many in the market. So a retailer might want to open a dollar store, but they can't.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's not so much what landlords are trying to attract tenants, it's what landlords want at their center to make a diverse, or a diverse shopping center.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's interesting. Along those lines, we've always said that, retail is one of the few real estate sectors that it matters to the retailer, to the tenant, who else is there, right? So co-tenancy. And you just spoke about it a little bit from the landlord perspective. I think retail centers have evolved to include a whole new mix of uses relative to where they were 15 years ago. Talk to us a little bit about that and some of the unique uses you're seeing take space in retail centers.
No, that's a great question. And you're right about it, really changing. The one thing that comes to mind that's changed over the years is medical. A lot more medical now are in retail centers. They think it's more, they have obviously found it's more convenient for their patients, or they may have more opportunities for walk-ins. But then from the landlord side, you have to be really careful. I was involved with a shopping center where there was an ophthalmologist. He had been there for a number of years. So, tonight, an ophthalmologist. And the tenant that went right next to him was a CrossFit.
Oh,
So when they're dropping weights,
shaking
and
oh
yeah.
gosh.
do you want to be sitting in the chair with the doctor, right?
Somebody with their finger in your eye? No. No.
So, that was one of those, like,
Oh,
by
wow.
the time we realized it was too late, other landlords are more savvy and would realize, hey,
Yeah.
if we're going to put a
Right.
CrossFit in here, we need to do some stuff in the construction phase to protect the other side of the wall.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
As far as like the anchor tenant, I mean, for so many years, right, it was like grocery anchored shopping centers are king. Is that still what you're seeing, or are there other big boxes that are coming in and there's more demand for?
I think you're still going to have the traditional grocery store as anchor tenant centers. There are also some centers that they're called non-anchored, which
Okay.
makes me think like it's floating, but it really just means there's not an anchor tenant.
Okay.
And like
Yeah.
you said, you typically think anchor means grocery store. So there
Right.
are really just some shopping centers that were originally built that never had a grocery store, or those over the years that have subdivided up that large space. And so the grocery
Right.
store no longer exists, and that just changes the style, the center that it is. But I think you'll always have grocery stores, grocery anchored shopping centers, just because we all need to buy food, no matter how much is delivered to our houses. Like, there's still a role in our lives for the grocery store that's close to you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
So, given that, and given like this discussion about various different types of tenants, talk to us a little bit about like the role that franchises play, like the franchise model, and how it, how it impacts the restaurant business as well as the retail business, and how does that factor into, location selection?
Yeah. The location selection, I think, depends on who the specific parent company is of a franchise,
Okay.
what their vision is, and if they have geographic restrictions that they're putting on perhaps franchisees. So,
Okay.
and this has always been true for corporate stores as well. Like, sometimes they'll put in geographic restrictions because they don't want to be competing with each other. They don't want to be too close. You need to have enough distance.
Right.
And so I think with some franchises, they may be, putting in those parameters. Another thing that landlords need to be very careful of are what type of arrangements are between the franchisee and the franchisor, and how that then affects the lease between the franchisee and the landlord.
Okay.
Because in a space with any type of asset class, you can assign a lease. It's in the legalese and the lease, but you can assign a lease. Well, sometimes these franchise agreements, it says if a franchisee is failing, the franchisor has the right to take the space and put in another operator.
Yep.
But then the landlord has no say on who this operator is. And so you have to look through that really, when you're taking on, from a landlord perspective, if you're taking on a franchise is see what the rider looks like and put protections in the lease, or make sure the lease addresses, those relationships.
Right.
Also, signage can be a thing. Parking can be a thing.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. One thing we haven't touched on is some of the trends that, spurred with the pandemic. So obviously the demand for things like outdoor seating. Do you think those are trends that are here to stay? Are you seeing any other
Curbside pickup is another
curbside
one that was
pickup?
huge.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, I still see it.
Yeah.
All of that anytime I'm shopping. Sometimes I get a little annoyed, right? Because all the best parking spots are taken, and
we
no
all
one's
learned a lot from the pandemic that life could be a little bit more convenient. I
but
think.
yet somehow I see most of the time those parking spots are empty. And I'm like, I want to park there.
Yeah.
But what do you see? Are those things that are here to stay? Are there other new things that have emerged, even just as far as layout or how consumers interact with the shopping center?
I agree with you. I think that the, pickup only parking is here to stay. I think outdoor seating is here to stay.
Yeah.
I live in a warm climate, so it's really easy for outdoor seating to be here year round, whereas in colder climates, perhaps some don't want to use the heating tents year round, but they will take advantage of the outdoor seating for a much longer season. So I think that's here to stay. Another trend that I've seen is, charging stations.
Oh,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
So I think, those came out during the pandemic. I think it was less because of the pandemic and just more that had to do with the evolution of electric vehicles.
Right.
Yeah.
But those are evolving. I think
That's
another
a good point. Yeah.
another trend that retail landlords are challenged with are food trucks. I think in offices, when offices will have a food truck festival, it's great because it's an amenity for tenants, and they're not, and these food trucks are not competing against any businesses in the office building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The same is not true for retail.
Right.
And so you have all these food trucks. In theory, that means your restaurants aren't going to have as much service that night. So it's that,
And your parking is being used.
and your parking is being used. So it's that weird dance between do we want to have a food truck event or not? Because is it competing with our tenants?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that sort of speaks to that tenant mix, like optimizing that tenant mix. Yeah.
And you mentioned the EV chargers. Are there any other like sustainability features that you're seeing landlords prioritize?
In the office space, especially with new construction or significant renovations, they will want to do LEED certification through the Green Council. And they use that, as a way to attract tenants, or at least just to send a message about their interests and whatnot.
Right.
On the retail side, I don't know that as much for building retail. I think the use of outdoor space, not just outdoor seating, but like grassy areas
Green
or
space,
benches, that's seating. I meant outdoor seating for a restaurant versus common area outdoor seating. And then other sustainability efforts within retail could be, the water for, the type of like the recycled water for irrigation or lights, lighting, daylight, harvesting, things like that. But that's for sustainability. It's also for cost saving, frankly. So it's that balance.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned sort of sustainable features as a way to attract some of the office tenants. And we also talked a little bit about the flight to quality in office and how amenities and, the refurbishment of office buildings sort of has been attractive to tenants. What are you seeing? Like, what types of amenities are kind of most sought after by office tenants, or what are the new trends? Like we talked about the EV chargers and retail centers. What are the new trends in office space in terms of amenities?
I think a lot of the amenities are the same as they've always been. They just might be updated for life now. I think of the places that have gyms, so the type of gym, or I think perhaps the equipment has evolved over the years, right? A coffee station or some type of coffee, it's heavily evolved to now include tea and smoothies and acai bowls. But again, it's the same thing. It's, the breakfast type food available. There was another one, and we might have to cut this part out because it just jumped out of my head.
Okay.
Let's see. The fitness center, the food.
Still seems like we're seeing office owners try to incorporate like entertainment and social type activities into their buildings. Like you still see these like recreation rooms or golf simulators or
and
like some of the over the top stuff. Yeah.
I mean, I think they might try to build it, but then like as an employee, like, do you want to be staying there after work, or would you want to just go home?
Right. Yeah, that's a tough one.
And I think that's even like you talked about the food trucks. That's where sometimes the events come into play, because that was something that a decade ago office landlords didn't have events, but now like in downtown Philly, there's yoga in the square, and you're like, what? Aren't you supposed to be working? It's interesting how everything has evolved.
Yeah.
But I guess on the retail side though, Amanda, do you still think those experiences and things are effective? Because I think we're seeing a lot of shopping centers and malls really up that, like you said, whether it's a food truck or just an event at the retail center to try to engage families on the weekends or whatever it may be. We're getting into the holiday season. I'm sure we'll see a lot of that. Do you still see that that's a effective strategy on the retail landlord side?
I do, because I think it's bringing people to the center, and that's ultimately what they want. They want people to think of that place. Oh, that's the place where they have the activities for kids.
Yeah,
That's the shopping center where they do yoga in front of the grocery store every Thursday morning.
Right.
Because then you're going for yoga. And when you're done, you'll run into the grocery store, or you'll become familiar with what other stores are there. So I think retail landlords have found that can be a very effective strategy.
Right.
I don't think it's needed for all shopping centers. I think you're always going to have the quiet ones that have the services you need, like the grocery store, the pharmacy, the dry cleaner, like the boring ones that are so useful and you want them close to your house.
Right.
I think actually ones that are more popular these days, I'll speak as a consumer, is like the UPS store and the FedEx store, so that when you want to return packages, it's as close to you as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
I love when I can knock out all of my errands in one place. That's the goal. Yeah.
That is ideal.
So like, I know when I go to Whole Foods, if I have an Amazon return, to make sure to take it with me, just because it's easier. So we don't need to have an event, and that's where I'm going, because I, want to take things.
Yeah,
exactly.
There's a time and a place for it.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, I think at this point we can circle back to where we started, which was about headlines that we're seeing in this space. And now we want to give you the opportunity to write what your ideal headline for, it can be retail leasing or just commercial leasing in general. What would you love to see published out there about the space?
I think what's published out there about this space is accurate once you read the story. It's just like we said in the beginning, the headlines are so deceiving. So the one, there's a recent one from Florida, the Florida Business Journal or a Florida publication that said, retail is in demand, supply is shrinking. Well, they're trying to get that to bait you. But then when you read the story, well, it makes sense, right? Retailers want to be in front of the public, but supply is shrinking. Well, sure, if demand is high, then supply is going to be low, but that's not buzzy. So I guess the story is true, but you just have to read more than just the headline, which is more of a reflection on society today, when we all just want the headline as our news.
Oh, yeah.
And there's more behind just the headline.
Yeah, completely.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How would you frame though that headline, or what would you like to see sort of be what people click on?
Yeah. If you wonder why it takes so long for a store to open.
That's right.
I like that.
Yep. There's a lot there.
There is a lot there.
All right.
Great.
Amanda, anything we didn't touch on that you want our listeners to know?
There probably is, but I'll say no.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been a fun conversation. We love talking about trends and people and their behavior. So
I'm happy to chat with you about that anytime.
Excellent.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you.
Well, that was so fun. Retail is near and dear to both of our hearts. And it's just so easy and natural to talk about.
Yeah. And I think Amanda was spot on, right? The whole premise of our show too is read past the headline.
Yep.
Right? I mean, they're getting you to click on it, but there's more to the story.
Right. And there's nothing more frustrating when you're on the client side to just see the headline that is it's not even true. So and then people pass them along because they see the headline, but they don't read the article.
Yeah, so. But it's nice to see. I think retail has had a tough go these last couple years, but I think there's a lot of positive things happening for the sector. So it's exciting to see.
And office as well. I think some of the headlines we were seeing, especially in New York City, really picking up and people heading back to the office. So maybe we're shifting back to a prior paradigm.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you all again next time.
This podcast is a production of Gregory FCA. If you enjoyed our discussion, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts